John, here is what was reported on Global Times. They're talking about that 28 point after the meeting that Rubio had in Geneva. They have reduced to 19 points.
Yes,
And it seems that you've mentioned the three issues, the main critical issues was the limitation on the military size, the territorial concessions, and the NATO, membership. They were all removed from the 28 points, if I'm not mistaken. You
correct.
so what's left of, you know, it's unbelievable. I don't know how do they believe that Russia would somehow make any sort of agreement with the West or with the Trump administration in such situation, with such conditions that they're putting on.
Well, if you go back to, pardon me, to the picture, Nima, I can point out that in the picture, you can see at the very back on the left side, on the American side of the table, you can see at the very back of the table, the man in the military uniform, that is General George, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff. To the left of him, I believe you can see General Donahue, though because the military figure that I identify as Donahue may not be Donahue, but he is in a blue-colored uniform, not a regular U.S. Army uniform. Next to him is Rubio, and we can, on the other side of the table, we have the Ukrainians led by Andrei Yermak.
Yeah.
The names are not significant. The answer to your question lies in the military officers on the US side of the table have come with Driscoll, who's on the left side of Rubio, on the left side of the picture, to tell the Ukrainian delegation on the other side, you cannot win this war. You have lost it unless you get out now. In a sense, the answer to your question is this group of people represent the losers of the war. The chaps in the military uniforms understand very well that there is nothing the US can do militarily now to stave off the defeat of all the Ukrainian pockets up and down the front, and nothing they can do to save Ukraine from the air attacks, slowly but surely eliminating power supplies and the capacity to fuel, heat, and light in the Western Ukraine for the remaining through the winter. Those are the uniforms who know. They are the uniforms who've told the civilians on the Ukrainian side there is nothing the US can do militarily to stave off such a defeat. So what were they talking about at the table? They were talking about the terms of a pause that would prevent such a total defeat. They were saying to Zelensky regime, you either sign terms that we will attempt to enforce on the Russians, or you will die. That's what that meeting represents. That's what the the combination of uniforms, Driscoll, Rubio, and the others were doing. They were disguising their defeat. They were protecting Trump from having to accept a loss in this war of a president who win, never lose, lose, lose. So to go back to your question, it becomes a question of what the Russian side proposes to do next. And that's a bit more complicated. And what we can see already, the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, insisted, as he did last week, as the spokesman for the foreign ministry said last week, as those of your colleagues who've been on the podcast already have said, they've said they have not seen the proposal. You can't negotiate with a megaphone. Dmitry Peskov said it for the president. Then the president called in the Security Council meeting last Friday night, the collective Politburo, you might say, or a decision-making body of the Russian side. And President Putin is recorded in the Kremlin communique as saying, we know what the proposals were. They were communicated through official channels. President Putin appears to have been contradicting the foreign ministry on the point. We know what they were. However, as Foreign Minister Lavrov has said in the clip you just mentioned, they appear to contradict the understandings we thought we had reached with Trump at Anchorage. Now, when Anchorage happened, that summit, we went through the details of a summit that was supposed to have lasted for 4.5 hours with a 45-minute press conference. In fact, we now know from the American side, not from the Russian side, that Trump got up and said, I'm going home after half of the time. He cut the entire proceeding short to about 2 hours, 15 minutes, and the press conference to 12 minutes. 12 of those minutes were occupied, 8 with a written statement that President Putin read out, and 4 that President Trump read out also. What does one learn or what does one understand when Foreign Minister Lavrov says were the understandings reached? Whatever we understand to have happened, half of the time occurred instead of the full amount of the time. So let's say half of the understandings they were aimed at were reached, not the full lot. So half of the understandings leave half, let's say, underinterpreted, ambiguous, difficult to understand in retrospect. So the Russian side is trying to say that while we don't yet know officially what the American side proposes, especially the so-called 28-point plan, points 13 and 14 in particular, that I've already mentioned, that deal with the investment of money, the Russian side, we say we can't officially negotiate with unofficial claims and papers that haven't been presented as a complete US package that the Ukrainians agree to. While we can't do that, there is a faction. There must be a faction. The evidence shows there is a Russian negotiating team in Abu Dhabi negotiating on the basis of those 28 points. Who that is, as I've said, speculative, and I've mentioned a name or two. What we can also infer is that there's not the kind of consensus on the Russian side yet on the details of the terms. And what we've also suggested is that there cannot be a Russian consensus yet because the terms the US side is leaking defy the Russian consensus as has been enunciated by President Putin. So what Lavrov means by the Trump understandings, the understandings with Trump at Anchorage, is what President Putin told Trump that Trump appeared to understand and then agree with. What those understandings are contradicted by almost all of the terms. The Geneva terms, let's call them, instead of using arithmetical tags, 28 points, 19 points, and so forth. Let's bear in mind that there are 31 points in the original June 2025 Russian document at Istanbul. Let's talk about, tag them with the geographical names. What we can say is, and I hope this answers your question, there is a division of labor and arguably a division of view, and therefore dissensus, not consensus on the Russian side, of what the Americans are doing to organize an allied agreement. And if they go to the extent we have now been told happened in Abu Dhabi, we ask, who are the Russians who are there to suggest that they agree to this extension? And does the extension, with all of what we've just said, amount to a fundamental contradiction of the Russian terms with objectives of the special military operation, and a fundamental contradiction of what has happened on the ground?
Yeah. John, what we've learned just moments ago from Peskov, he said that Russia has not received any updated version of Washington's Ukraine plan, the
Mhm.
new one that they are preparing. And how do you think that as time goes by, the situation, because Europeans have a crucial and important role, in my
Yes.
opinion, in the whole situation. And we've learned from the Russian sources, from the Russian, the intelligence, the foreign Russian foreign intelligence service. They're talking about the Britain has developed a plan in case it wants to undermine Trump's peacekeeping stance for its own benefit. What is going on in the mind of Europeans right now, and what is the crucial point that they're pushing for?
I believe you've asked me that good question before, and colleagues on Dialogue Works have slightly different views, but let me try to repeat what I believe the evidence shows. The evidence shows that the European regimes understand that they too cannot appear to lose this war. On the other hand, there's a limit of their resources to continue the war. The Europeans wish to continue, in particular Germany, the UK, and France, wish to continue the long war against Russia, and have bet the future of their weak political regimes on the continuation of the war. Germany is remilitarizing, Poland is remilitarizing, France and England, the UK, doing the same, Finland and all the others up and down the northern European front. They must continue the war. They must avoid losing the war in any decisive way. They haven't the resources to do this, especially since the Trump administration has enforced the principle that whatever the Europeans do to continue the war, they must pay the United States' bill. So continuing the war for the United States is a case of first not losing, and second, extracting money from the Europeans to pay for the weapons required to continue the war on the Ukrainian warfighting platform. So not losing and continuing, those are, let's say, slightly contradictory objectives, but those are the objectives of the European powers, and we can see it in all of the terms. To cover the lack of resources, points 13 and 14 of the so-called plan mirror the European insistence that the 300 billion of sovereign reserves stolen from the Central Bank of Russia at the beginning of the war will be used to cover war fighting costs and reparation costs, and you name it. The Ukrainians have a label for what they intend to do after they've stolen the sovereign reserves, and that covers some of the gap in Europe's and the US aim to continue the war. So that's what's happening. What else can we try to say? To what extent the European electors, the voters in Germany, will tolerate this kind of short war, long war continuation at the cost of the European taxpayers, at the cost of European electricity inflation, at the cost of all the social welfare that's been abandoned in favor of military objectives. It's up to the European voters to express themselves, but so far they've been repressed. They haven't, and until they do, this combination of contradictory objectives with remilitarization will continue. Now, the money also talks as loudly, if more loudly, than votes. And the money markets have, over the last few days, cut the stock market price of the defense companies, the listed defense companies of France, the UK, and Germany, and the United States. The market thinks that there's going to be less war, meaning less state procurement money, meaning less taxpayer money in the US and in Europe for the continuation of the war through state spending on the defense companies. Less state spending means less revenue, means less earnings, meaning less share price and capital gain, meaning less bonuses for everybody. The money markets are saying they don't believe that the terms of a peace would allow a long-term war form of prosperity for themselves. So money markets are talking more loudly at the moment than European voters. But the contradictory nature of European decision making remains. And this is not the coalition of the brain dead. This is not the coalition of stupid miscalculation. It's a clever calculation of politically weak individuals combined with the US fantasy that lose, lose, lose can be disguised as win, win, win.